They say a home is where you are supposed to feel safest. It is the place where the walls protect you from the harshness of the outside world, where the people inside are supposed to love you unconditionally. But for me, that house stopped being a home the day my mother closed her eyes for the very last time. I was only 14 back then, a kid trying to understand why the universe could be so cruel. My father was a good man, but he was weak. He was terrified of loneliness, and that terror blinded him. Just 2 years after my mother passed, a woman named Victoria walked into our lives. She was beautiful, elegant, and spoke with a voice as sweet as honey. My father was captivated. He thought she was an angel sent to put our broken family back together. But I saw the truth. I saw the coldness in her eyes when my father wasn't looking. I saw the way her smile vanished the moment she turned her back on us. To my father, she was a savior. To me, she was a master of disguise. The moment they got married, the mask began to slip. Slowly, carefully, Victoria began to rewrite the rules of our house. It started with small things. My mother's favorite paintings were moved to the attic. Her garden was dug up and replaced with cold, gray stones. Then, she turned her attention to me. She didn't abuse me out in the open. She was far too clever for that. Instead, she used whispers. She would tell my father that I was being disrespectful, that I was staying out too late, that I was failing my classes, even when my report card showed straight A's. She created a wall of lies between my father and me, and day by day, that wall grew taller. By the time I graduated from high school, the tension in that house was suffocating. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a single suitcase, looked my father in the eyes, and told him I was leaving for college. I hoped he would ask me to stay. I hoped he would see the pain in my eyes. But Victoria was standing right behind him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, squeezing just enough to remind him of her presence. My father simply nodded, gave me a weak hug, and told me to study hard. "Don't worry about us, Leo," Victoria had said that day, her voice dripping with fake warmth. "We will manage just fine without you here. Take care of yourself." I walked out of that front door, promising myself I would never look back. I worked 3 jobs while going to college. I lived on instant noodles, slept on a mattress I found on the street, and spent countless nights studying under the dim light of a cheap desk lamp. It was hard. There were times I wanted to quit, times I wanted to call my father and beg for help. But every time I picked up the phone, I remembered Victoria's triumphant smile. I realized that asking for help would mean admitting defeat to her. So I pushed forward. 10 years passed. 10 long, grueling years of sweat, tears, and relentless ambition. I didn't just survive, I thrived. I started my own software development company from a tiny, windowless room. Today, that company is one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the state. I became a self-made millionaire before the age of 30. I had wealth, I had respect, and I had a life I built entirely with my own 2 hands. But I never forgot where I came from, and I never forgot the man who would let me walk away. Every single month, I tried to call my father. Sometimes he would answer, his voice sounding older, more tired, and deeply subdued. Our conversations were always short, lasting barely 2 minutes before he would suddenly say he had to go because Victoria needed him. I could hear the fear in his voice, the complete submission to a woman who had taken over his entire existence. I knew she was isolating him, cutting him off from the rest of the world, so she could control him completely. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, I received a phone call from an unknown number. It was an old family friend, Mr. Harrison, who lived next door to my father. His voice was trembling. "Lau, is it you?" He whispered, checking to make sure no one was listening. "You need to come home, son. Your father, he's not doing well. Victoria has completely taken over everything. He's sick, Leo. She won't let anyone see him. I saw him through the window yesterday, and he looks like a shadow of himself. You need to come back before it's too late." Hearing those words broke something inside me. All the anger, all the resentment I had carried for a decade vanished. replaced by a cold, sharp dread. My father was in danger. The woman who had driven me out of my own home was now destroying the man who gave me life. I didn't hesitate. I closed my laptop, grabbed my car keys, and walked out of my office. I got in my car and drove for 3 hours straight, back to the town I thought I had left behind forever. The rain beat heavily against my windshield, matching the storm brewing in my chest. As I turned down the familiar, tree-lined street of my childhood, my heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled up to the grand estate. It looked different now, fancier, heavily renovated with expensive modern gates and high-tech security cameras. Victoria had clearly used my father's hard-earned wealth to transform the place into her own personal fortress. I stepped out of the car, adjusting my tailored coat, and walked up the stone pathway. I stood in front of the heavy oak door and rang the bell. I waited. A minute passed. Then the door opened. There she stood, Victoria. She had aged, but she still wore the same expensive jewelry, the same heavy makeup, and that same haughty, arrogant expression. She looked down her nose at me, squinting for a brief second before recognition flashed across her face. The fake warmth she used to pretend to have was entirely gone. Now, there was only disgust. "Leo," she said, her voice dropping to a cold, icy tone. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see my father," I replied, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I heard he's sick. Let me in." Victoria scoffed, a cruel laugh escaping her lips. She stepped forward, blocking the doorway completely. "Your father is resting, and he doesn't want to see you. You made your choice 10 years ago when you walked out of this house. You are a stranger here. Get off my property." "This is my father's house," I said, my voice dropping an octave, filled with a dangerous stillness. "And I'm not going anywhere until I see him." Victoria's eyes narrowed into slits. A wicked, triumphant smile spread across her face. "Is that so? We'll see about that." She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and dialed a number. She looked me dead in the eye as she spoke into the receiver. "Security? We have a trespasser at the main entrance. A strange man is trying to break into the house. Come and remove him immediately." She hung up the phone, looked at me, and whispered, "Goodbye, Leo." And with that, she slammed the heavy oak door right in my face. I stood there on the porch, staring at the cold wood of the front door. The rain was coming down harder now, washing over my face, but I barely felt it. Inside me, a fire was igniting. For years, I had stayed away, thinking that ignoring the pain was the mature thing to do. But standing here, being treated like a criminal on the very ground where I learned to walk, something snapped. Before I could even process the shock of having the door slammed in my face, I heard the heavy footsteps of 2 large men jogging up the driveway. They wore black security uniforms. Victoria hadn't just called any security. She had hired a private firm to guard the estate. "Sir, you need to step away from the door and leave the premises immediately," the larger of the 2 guards said, his hand resting on his belt. He looked intimidating, but I didn't blink. "This is my father's house," I said, maintaining absolute composure. "I am Leo Vance. I have every right to be here. We have strict orders from the owner of the house." "Mrs. Vance," the guard replied coldly. "She says you are trespassing. If you do not leave right now, we will use force and call the police." I looked up at the security camera mounted right above the door. I knew Victoria was watching through the monitor inside, enjoying every single second of this humiliation. She wanted to break me. She wanted to show me that she held all the cards, that I was nothing compared to her power in this house. I took a deep breath. Getting into a physical altercation with security guards or getting arrested for trespassing wouldn't help my father. It would only give Victoria exactly what she wanted, a reason to banish me legally. "Fine," I said, fixing my eyes directly on the camera lens. "I'll leave." I turned around and walked back down the stone path, my steps deliberate and slow. The guards escorted me all the way to the edge of the property, watching me until I got into my car. As I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, I looked into the rearview mirror. The guards were standing at the gate, looking pleased with themselves. But what Victoria didn't know was that I wasn't the helpless 14-year-old boy she used to bully. I wasn't the broke college student who had to run away to survive. I was a man with resources, intelligence, and an elite network of professionals at my disposal. If she wanted to play dirty, I was going to show her how the game is truly played. I pulled over 2 blocks away from the estate, parking under the shade of a large oak tree. I grabbed my phone and made a call to my personal assistant, Marcus. Marcus, I need you to put me in touch with Julian Vance's legal and financial records immediately. I want a full audit on everything connected to my father's name, his business, and his estate over the last 10 years. Use our top corporate investigators. I want it done by tonight. On it, boss, Marcus replied without hesitation. Should I also look into the stepmother, Victoria Vance? Yes, I said, my voice cold as ice. Dig up everything. Every bank account, every asset, every legal document she has signed. I want to know where every single dollar is gone. As I hung up, I sat back in my car, staring out into the rain. Victoria thought she had won a minor victory by shutting the door on me. What she didn't realize was that she had just opened a door she could never close. While waiting for the investigators to do their work, I didn't just sit idly. I drove to the local precinct. Thanks to my company's philanthropic work, I knew the local police chief quite well. I walked into the station and asked for a private meeting with Chief Evans. We sat in his office, and I explained the situation, how my sick father was being isolated, how I was denied entry, and my concerns regarding elder abuse and financial manipulation. Chief Evans listened intently, his expression growing serious. Leo, without solid proof of abuse or illegal activity, my hands are tied from launching a formal criminal investigation into a private household. But if you can provide me with undeniable evidence that she is harming him or stealing his assets, I will personally sign the warrant. That's all I need to know. Chief, I said, shaking his hand. The evidence is coming. By 8 p.m. that evening, I was sitting in a quiet hotel room downtown, surrounded by 3 laptops. My phone buzzed. It was an encrypted email from Marcus. The file was massive. It contained the complete financial history of my father's estate and Victoria's personal spending habits over the last decade. As I opened the documents and began to read, my jaw tightened and my blood ran cold. The sheer scale of the betrayal was breathtaking. Victoria hadn't just been managing my father's money. She had been systematically draining him dry. Over the past 5 years, as my father's health began to decline, she had transferred millions of dollars from his corporate accounts into offshore shell companies registered under her maiden name. She had forged his signature on multiple property deeds, selling off family assets to fund a lavish lifestyle that she hid from him. But the worst discovery was yet to come. I opened the medical records that our investigator managed to pull from the private clinic my father supposedly attended. My father hadn't been seen by a legitimate doctor in over 2 years. Instead, Victoria had hired a private, uncertified caretaker to administer heavy sedatives to him daily. She was keeping him in a constant state of confusion and physical weakness, so he could never question what she was doing with his fortune. She was slowly fading him out of existence, waiting for the day he would pass away so she could inherit the remainder of the estate legally. I looked at the final page of the financial report. There was a document dated just 3 days ago. It was a revised will. According to this new document, which bore a highly suspicious, shaky signature of my father, 100% of the Vance family fortune, the estate, and the remaining business shares were to be transferred entirely to Victoria upon his passing. I was completely cut out, and more importantly, my father's extended family was left with nothing. She was preparing for the endgame. She thought she was days away from getting everything she ever dreamed of. I stared at the screen, a dark smile slowly forming on my lips. Victoria thought she was a master chess player. She thought she had protected herself behind security guards, high fences, and forged papers. But she didn't realize that I didn't need to break into her house to destroy her. I just needed to take away the ground she was standing on. I picked up my phone and called an elite legal team that handled my company's high-stakes corporate acquisitions. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet hotel room, "I have a project for you. By tomorrow morning, I want a complete freeze on every single account associated with Victoria Vance and Vance Enterprises. I want an emergency injunction filed for elder abuse, grand larceny, and corporate fraud. And I want it executed by tomorrow afternoon." The trap was set. Victoria had called security on me to protect her little empire. Now, I was going to pull the strings from the shadows and watch that entire empire crumble to dust. The next morning broke with a heavy, gray fog rolling over the city. It was the perfect backdrop for what was about to unfold. I hadn't slept a single wink. Instead, I spent the entire night coordinating with my legal team, the financial forensic experts, and Chief Evans. By 9 a.m., the machinery of justice was already moving, silent but unstoppable. To understand how deep Victoria's deception went, you have to understand the business my father built. Vance Enterprises was a mid-sized logistics company. It wasn't a multi-billion-dollar empire, but was incredibly stable and generated millions in pure profit every year. It was my father's pride and joy, the result of 30 years of hard labor. When Victoria married him, she insisted on becoming the chief financial officer. My father, blinded by love and wanting to show her complete trust, handed her the keys to the kingdom. Over the years, she replaced the old, loyal accountants with her own people, corrupt individuals who were more than happy to look the other way as long as they received a piece of the pie. But Victoria made one fatal mistake. She assumed I was out of the picture permanently. She assumed that because I never came back, I never looked into the company's filings. She didn't realize that as a shareholder by default through my biological mother's estate, I still held a minority stake of 15% in Vance Enterprises. A stake I had never touched, but one that gave me full legal right to demand an emergency, unannounced forensic audit of the company's books. At 10:30 a.m., my legal team officially filed the emergency injunction at the county courthouse. Because the evidence of financial fraud and potential elder endangerment was so overwhelming, the judge signed off on the orders immediately. The orders were clear. All personal and corporate bank accounts under the name of Victoria Vance and Vance Enterprises were to be frozen effective immediately, pending a full criminal investigation. A temporary conservatorship over my father's person and assets was granted to me, giving me full legal authority over his medical care and living arrangements. I stood in the office of my lead attorney, Mr. Sterling, watching as the digital signatures were finalized. "It's done, Leo," Mr. Sterling said, turning his monitor toward me. "As of right now, Victoria Vance is financially paralyzed. Her credit cards won't work. Her corporate accounts are locked. She cannot transfer a single dollar out of the country. She is completely cut off. What about the house?" I asked. "The deed she forged is under review. Legally, because of the fraud investigation, she cannot sell, modify, or restrict access to the property anymore. You have the legal right to enter that house with law enforcement at any moment." I looked out the window, watching the rain tap against the glass. "No," I said quietly. "Not yet. I want her to feel the walls closing in first. I want her to realize she's trapped before I walk through that door. I wanted Victoria to experience the exact same feeling she gave me 10 years ago. The feeling of suddenly having everything taken away, of being completely helpless, of watching your future vanish into thin air." At exactly 1 p.m., the bank execution orders went live. I knew exactly what Victoria's daily routine was. Every Wednesday afternoon, she went to an exclusive, high-end boutique downtown to spend thousands of dollars on designer clothes and jewelry, using the corporate credit card funded by my father's company. It was her way of flaunting her unearned wealth. I sat in my car outside the boutique, watching through the glass window. Victoria was inside, laughing with the store manager as she selected several expensive handbags and diamond necklaces. She walked up to the counter, pulled out her shiny, black corporate card, and handed it to the cashier with an arrogant air of superiority. The cashier swiped the card. Declined. Victoria frowned, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. She murmured something about the machine being faulty and told the cashier to try again. The cashier swiped it a second time. Declined. Victoria's face began to turn a bright shade of crimson. She pulled out another card, a personal platinum credit card. Try this one. There must be an issue with our corporate server today. The cashier swiped the second card. Declined. Account frozen. The cashier looked up, her expression turning from polite to deeply suspicious. I'm sorry, ma'am, but both cards are being rejected by your bank. The system is telling me to confiscate the card. Victoria exploded in rage. Do you know who I am? My husband owns Vance Enterprises. There are millions of dollars in those accounts. How dare you insult me? She snatched her cards back from the cashier's hand, her chest heaving with anger, and stormed out of the boutique, leaving the expensive bags on the counter. I watched from my car as she stood on the sidewalk, pulling out her phone. She was furiously dialing her bank's private wealth management line. I could see her pacing back and forth, her face growing paler by the second, as the bank representative on the other end gave her the devastating news. All her accounts had been frozen by a federal court order. She hung up, her hands visibly shaking. She tried to call her personal accountant, but there was no answer. She tried to call the CFO of Vance Enterprises, but his line went straight to voicemail. The panic was finally setting in. The secure, luxurious world she had built out of lies and cruelty was beginning to crack. She quickly hailed a taxi, since she couldn't even use her phone apps to pay for a premium ride anymore, and rushed back toward the estate. I started my engine and followed the taxi at a safe distance. The storm was finally here, and Victoria was running straight into it. When she arrived back at the estate, she rushed through the gates and ran into the house, desperate to find answers. She had no idea that the real nightmare was just about to begin. She had no idea that her phone was about to become her own personal torture device. I pulled up to the gate of the estate. The two security guards who had kicked me out the day before walked up to my car, their expressions stern. Sir, we told you yesterday, the guard started. I didn't let him finish. I rolled down my window and handed him a certified copy of the court order, stamped with the official seal of the state court. Read this, I said, my voice deadpan. I am Leo Vance. As of 1 hour ago, I am the legal administrator of this entire estate. Your contract with Victoria Vance is null and void. If you step foot on this property again, you'll be arrested for conspiracy to commit elder abuse and trespassing. His eyes widening as he realized the gravity of the situation. He looked at his partner, then looked back at me. They didn't say a single word. They walked back to their guard shack, grabbed their personal belongings, and walked out of the gates, leaving the entrance completely wide open. The fortress had fallen. There was no one left to protect Victoria. I parked my car right in front of the main entrance, stepped out, and took a deep breath. I pulled out my phone and dialed Victoria's personal number. I heard the phone ringing inside the house. I hung up before she could answer. Then I dialed again, and again, and again. I wanted her to see my name flashing on her screen over and over. I wanted her to feel the suffocating weight of knowing that the person she had destroyed 10 years ago was now standing right outside her door, holding her entire destiny in his hands. Inside the grand house, Victoria was pacing around the lavish living room like a trapped animal. Every single window was shut, the curtains drawn, but the silence she usually enjoyed was replaced by a relentless, terrifying sound. Ring, ring, ring. She looked down at her phone, resting on the glass coffee table. The screen illuminated the dim room, displaying a name she never thought she would fear, Leo. She didn't answer. She couldn't bring herself to do it. Every time the phone rang, it felt like a physical blow to her chest. She had spent the last hour trying to call her lawyers, her financial advisors, and her friends in high places. But the moment they heard that her accounts were frozen under a federal fraud investigation, they suddenly became unavailable. They refused to take her calls. They abandoned her the second they realized she no longer had the money to pay them. She was completely alone in that massive house, surrounded by luxury items she could no longer afford, purchased with money that wasn't hers. Ring, ring, ring. The phone lit up again. She picked it up, her fingers trembling so violently she almost dropped it. She looked at the call log. 68 missed calls. Every single one of them was from me. To Victoria, those 68 missed calls weren't just notifications. They were a countdown. They were a psychological sledgehammer, breaking down whatever confidence she had left. She knew that I wasn't calling to chat. She knew that every missed call represented an asset she had lost, a lie that had been uncovered, a piece of her trap that had turned against her. Suddenly, the ringing stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sound itself. Then, a heavy, deliberate knock echoed through the house. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the front door, the very door where she had stood just 24 hours ago, looking down her nose at me and calling security to throw me out like garbage. Victoria froze. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She walked slowly toward the foyer, her expensive high heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She crept up to the window next to the door and parted the curtains just a fraction of an inch to look outside. There I stood. I wasn't soaking wet today. I was wearing a pristine, charcoal gray suit. I looked calm, composed, and completely in control. Behind me, parked in the driveway, were 3 black SUVs. Next to them stood Chief Evans and 3 uniformed police officers, along with 2 medical professionals dressed in scrubs. Victoria felt the air leave her lungs. She realized, with absolute certainty, that her reign of terror had come to an edge. She unlocked the heavy deadbolt, her hands shaking so badly it took her 3 attempts. She pulled the door open, but this time she didn't step forward to block it. She stepped back, her eyes wide with a mixture of anger, desperation, and terror. "Leo," she whispered, her voice cracking. What is the meaning of this? Why are the police here? Why are my accounts frozen? What did you do?" I stepped over the threshold, walking into the house without asking for permission. I looked around the grand foyer, noting the expensive modifications she had made, paid for with my father's blood and sweat. "I didn't do anything, Victoria," I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and entirely devoid of anger. "You did this to yourself. I merely showed the world the truth of what you've been doing. You have no right to be here," she shrieked, trying to muster up her old, intimidating persona, though her trembling voice betrayed her completely. "This is my house. I am Julian's wife. I will have you arrested for this." "Actually," I said, pulling a folded document from my inside jacket pocket and handing it to her, "you have no rights left here. This is a court-ordered emergency injunction and a temporary conservatorship. As of today, I have full legal authority over my father, his assets, and this property. You, Victoria, are no longer an owner. You are an occupant under criminal investigation." Victoria grabbed the paper, her eyes scanning the legal text frantically. Her face drained of all color as she reached the section detailing the freezing of her global assets and the suspension of her corporate power. No, this is a mistake. This is a lie," she screamed, tearing the paper in half and throwing the pieces at me. "Your father gave me everything. He loves me. He wanted me to have it all. My father is a sick man whom you have been systematically poisoning with illegal sedatives to steal his life's work," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, dangerous whisper that cut through her scams like a knife. "Did you really think no one would notice? Did you really think I would just let you fade him away?" Before she could respond, I turned toward the police officers standing at the door. "Chief Evans, please secure the house. The medical team needs to go upstairs and assess my father immediately." Right away, Leo, Chief Evans nodded. He signaled to the EMTs, who quickly moved past Victoria with a stretcher and medical bags, heading straight up the grand staircase. Victoria tried to run after them, to block the stairs, but an officer stepped in front of her, his hand resting on his belt. "Ma'am, please step back and remain where you are. Do not interfere with the medical personnel." Victoria collapsed against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the cold marble floor. Her expensive hair was disheveled, her makeup ruined by tears of panic and rage. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with pure hatred. "You think you've won, Leo?" She spat, her voice venomous. "You think you can just come back after 10 years and take everything? You are nothing. You're just a spiteful little boy who couldn't handle the fact that his father moved on." I walked over to her, looking down at her as she sat on the floor. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel a desire to yell or strike back. All I felt was a profound sense of justice. 10 years ago, you called security to throw a 14-year-old boy's memory out of this house, I said softly. Yesterday, you called security to throw me out. You thought power was about how many people you could hurt, how much money you could steal, and how many walls you could build. But real power is the truth. And the truth just broke your walls down. I pulled out my phone one last time, showing her the screen. 68 missed calls, Victoria, I said. Every single one of them was an opportunity for you to pick up, realize you were caught, and try to make amends. But you were too arrogant. You thought you were untouchable. Now, you have nothing left to answer for. As I spoke, one of the medical professionals came down the stairs, looking serious but relieved. "Lau, your father is conscious. He's heavily sedated, but he's responsive. We need to take him to the hospital immediately to flush the toxins out of his system, but he's going to make it. He wants to see you." Hearing those words, a massive weight lifted off my chest. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I brushed them away. I looked at Victoria one last time as the police officers began to read her rights, preparing to take her into custody for financial fraud and elder endangerment. I turned my back on her just as she had turned her back on me 10 years ago. But this time, I wasn't running away. I was walking upstairs back into my father's life to rebuild what she had tried so hard to destroy. The white, sterile walls of the hospital room were a stark contrast to the dark, suffocating atmosphere of the estate. The gentle, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound filling the room. I sat in a chair next to the bed, holding a hand that felt fragile, thin, and worn. My father looked so small beneath the white blankets. The man who had once seemed like a giant to me, the successful businessman who used to carry me on his shoulders, had been reduced to this by the greed of a woman he trusted. But as the fluids from the 4 lines slowly cleansed his system of the sedatives Victoria had been forcing upon him, the cloud in his eyes began to clear. He looked at me, squinting as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Lau," he whispered, his voice incredibly weak, barely a breath. "Is it really you, my boy?" "It's me, Dad," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I spiked his hand gently. "I'm here. You're safe now. No one is ever going to hurt you again." Tears rolled down his wrinkled cheeks, disappearing into his gray beard. "I'm so sorry, Leo. I'm so sorry. I was so blind. She told me you hated me. She told me you never wanted to see me again. Every time I asked about you, she said you hung up the phone. I thought I had lost my only son." "I know, Dad," I said, comforting him. "She lied to both of us. She wanted us apart, so she could control everything. But she failed. We are still here." Over the next few days, as my father's health steadily improved, the legal storm outside the hospital room grew into a full-blown hurricane for Victoria. With the evidence compiled by my forensic investigators and the medical reports confirming the presence of unprescribed, dangerous levels of sedatives in my father's bloodstream, the state prosecutors didn't hold back. Victoria was hit with a mountain of charges: grand larceny, corporate embezzlement, forgery, identity theft, and felony elder endangerment. Because her assets were completely frozen, she couldn't afford the high-priced defense attorneys she used to boast about. She was assigned a public defender who quickly realized that the case against her was airtight. There was no way out. The paper trail was too clear, the digital footprints too permanent. A few weeks later, a preliminary hearing was called. My father wasn't well enough to attend, but I stood in that courtroom representing the Vance family. Victoria was brought in wearing a plain, gray jumpsuit, her hands bound by handcuffs. All the glamour, all the expensive jewelry, and the arrogant smirk were gone. She looked hollow, broken, and utterly defeated. As she was led past my bench, she looked at me, her eyes pleading for a shred of mercy. I didn't look away, but I didn't offer her a smile of satisfaction either. I simply looked at her with a calm, steady gaze. Mercy is for those who make mistakes. Justice is for those who consciously choose to destroy others for their own gain. The judge didn't show her any leniency. Given the severity of the financial fraud and the physical harm inflicted upon a vulnerable elderly person, Victoria was denied bail and remanded to a maximum security facility pending her final sentencing. She is currently facing up to 25 years in prison. She will spend the rest of her prime years behind cold, concrete walls, experiencing the ultimate isolation, the very isolation she tried to inflict on my father and me. Vance Enterprises was handed over to my temporary management. The corrupt board members and accountants Victoria had hired were promptly fired and blacklisted from the financial industry. I integrated the company into my own tech firm, stabilizing its finances and ensuring that the loyal employees who had worked there for decades kept their jobs. But the true victory wasn't the money, the company, or the estate. The true victory happened a month later, on a warm, sunny afternoon. My father was officially discharged from the hospital. He couldn't walk long distances yet, so I pushed him in his wheelchair through the front gates of the estate. We walked down the stone path, past the garden that had once been destroyed. I had hired a team of landscapers to restore it completely. The cold, gray stones Victoria had put down were gone. In their place were rows of vibrant, beautiful roses, my biological mother's favorite flowers. The air was filled with their sweet scent. My father stopped the wheelchair, looking at the garden, his eyes shining with a profound sense of peace. He reached out, touching a soft petal, and looked up at me. "Thank you, Leo," he said, his voice stronger now, filled with life. "You didn't just save my life. You brought her home back." I knelt down next to him, looking at the grand house. It didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked like a home again. "We built it together, Dad," I said, "and no one can ever take it away from us again." Life has a beautiful, almost poetic way of balancing the scales. When I was 14 years old, sitting on the steps of that house, crying over the loss of my mother and feeling the cold rejection of a stepmother who wanted me gone, I thought my life was over. I thought that malice had won, that greed was the most powerful force in the world, and that honest, loving people were destined to be crushed under the weight of cruelty. I spent years carrying that pain, letting it fuel my ambition. I thought that becoming rich and successful was the ultimate way to prove my worth. But this entire experience taught me a lesson that I will carry with me for the rest of my days. Revenge is a word people throw around a lot. They think revenge is about hurting the person who hurt you, about screaming louder, about inflicting the same pain you felt. But true revenge isn't loud. It isn't violent. It isn't filled with hatred. True revenge is living well. True revenge is becoming so strong, so successful, and so rooted in truth that the lies of your enemies simply shatter when they come into contact with you. Victoria thought her money, her security guards, and her forged papers made her powerful. But her power was an illusion, built on a foundation of sand and deception. The moment the light of truth was shined upon her actions, her entire world collapsed in a matter of hours. She was left with 68 missed calls, a digital monument to her own panic, her own isolation, and her ultimate downfall. If you're watching this, and you are currently going through a dark time, if you have been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you have been cast out by the people who were supposed to protect you, if you feel like the world is unfair and that evil is winning, I want you to take a deep breath and listen to me closely. Do not let their cruelty change who you are. Do not stoop to their level. Do not waste your precious energy planning small, bitter acts of retaliation. Instead, take all that pain, all that anger, and all that betrayal and turn it into fuel. Fuel to work harder. Fuel to build your own life. Fuel to become a person of undeniable character, success, and strength. Build your own empire, not out of greed, but out of resilience. Because a day will come when the people who tried to bury you will realize that you weren't a victim, you were a seed. And from that seed, something powerful, beautiful, and unstoppable will grow. When they finally face the consequences of their actions, you won't need to lift a finger. The universe will handle the balance. And when they look for a way out, when they look for a lifeline, all they will find is the silence of their own choices and a long list of missed calls they can no longer answer. My father and I now spend our weekends sitting on the porch, watching the sunset over the rose garden. The house is filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of a real family. The past cannot be erased, and the years we lost can never be fully recovered. But the future is wide open, clean, and completely ours. Justice was served, not with a weapon, but with a pen, a court order, and the undeniable truth. And that is the greatest victory of all.